a country with a very strong religion background. And in China, when we make a study on the foreign issue, basically the religious elements is not on our first level, it's not our first consideration, it's not on our priority. I would like to say that if we take I will raise a few points. So see, if we can raise a lot of example to about the India's policy towards the Kashmir. We also can talk about a lot of things about the India's policy towards his neighboring countries such as Sri Lanka, Nepal, Maldives, especially for the recent couple of weeks to his India's policy to Maldives. And the people always talking about whether India will send the troops to Malay or not. And we also can raise a lot of the stories about the Indians' attitude towards the border areas with China, and also the Indians' policy towards Pakistan. We can raise a lot of stories, but we need to think about the one question: if we change the India to another country, what's the potential response from the world? Currently, all the Indian did to their own ethnic groups, minorities, to the Kashmir people, and to his neighboring country, no matter it's a small country like Maldives or the big country like China. The rest of the world, especially the Western world, basically remains silent. Nobody cares about what the Indian did in Indian-occupied Kashmir, whether they killed people or not. Nobody cares about the India's policy towards the neighboring country, whether it's against the UN chapter or not. Nobody cares about whether India will mobilize the troops to face the dangers to involve the war with another nuclear power. It seems that India is the country can do anything as their wish, and they don't need to pay any price. And everything he did was accepted by the Western power. Why was that? I think for this quite simple reason that firstly, there is always double standard. And secondly, the Western country, especially for the United States, they would like to see Indians rising. Even this rising also means the extremist side. Also, it means the Indian will be more aggressive to all the neighboring countries, even want to enhance its domain in this region. But the Western power doesn't care about it. But try to think about another question: that if we change the Indian to China, the same thing Indian did towards his neighboring countries, towards his minorities. If China did the same thing, what the Western power will say? So we can see there's a quite difference. But this is not my point. My point is that why China didn't say anything, just like the Western powers. We didn't talk much, just like the United States. It seemed that India's policy towards all these issues I mentioned, China doesn't care about it. Why? Personally, I'm working on the South Asia issue. I think that's very sensitive and that's a very important issue. But we have to admit that if we make this research or study on the whole Chinese foreign policy decision-making community, or also the think tanks, Indian issue is not on the priority. It's on the second level. Even it's kind of marginalized. So when we see China's policy towards India, we can't say China would like to be to adopt a more compromised policy towards India or not. It just China didn't take this as Chinese policy's priority. China think it's not worthy to confront India in such kind of issue. So why this idea came from? Where this idea came from? I think currently I would like to provide my explanation that basically because of China's foreign policy about this issue had three dilemmas. One is the dilemma between the geopolitics and the geoeconomics. For China, if we are talking about in the context of the geopolitics, India definitely, at least is its Chinese competitor. So China had to at least adopt some policy to balance India's role, or if not challenging India's so-called domain in this region. But if we are talking about the geoeconomics, we have to admit that India is the major economy body in this region. It's a billions of people's potential market. So China also has some expectation on the Indian's market. We want to explore the Indian's market, no matter how consolidated the relationship between China and Pakistan. Pakistan is a relatively small market compared with India. So this is the one dilemma, how to make the balance between geopolitics or geoeconomics. In my personal opinion, geopolitics should enjoy the priority, because if you can't solve this problem in the geopolitics context, geoeconomics, the cooperation in the context of the geoeconomics doesn't mean anything. See what happened between China and the India is China tried to do a lot of things to export the India's market, but didn't get anything. It's quite simple reason, because India has a very deep concern on the security issue. So this kind of things that's something you could imagine, but you won't reach it. That's the first dilemma. Second dilemma is the Chinese foreign policy now is trying to maintain the balance between the major power on neighboring country. For neighboring country, China would like to expand the economic influence and try to conduct so-called BRI, Belt and Road initiatives. And India will play the kind of the important role in this context. But if we are talking about the major power, basically we are talking about China's relationship with the United States. The most important and the most serious strategic pressure for China is the pressure from America. So if China do too much to balance India, means we push India towards America. And also means American can find a more convenient method to rebalance China or on the coastal areas, on the coastal directions. So China has kind of a dilemma that we want to try to control the situation between China and the United States, and meanwhile China also focusing on such kind of a direction. China doesn't want to doesn't hope his strategy was derailed by so-called secondary levels competitors, to be specific, India. So how we can read the Doklam accent, just like this. Doklam accent is very, very serious. For China felt a lot of the pressure from the domestic mass media and the people's so-called the people's opinion, public opinion. But if China really ask China to make the decision and take some very strong action against the Indians' intrusion to Doklam areas, China not only think about the situation between China and India, they also think about the general situation between China and the United States and the triangle relationship between China and India and the United States. So it's another dilemma. And third dilemma is that China try to maintain the balance that focusing on the major direction and meanwhile control the situation in the marginal areas. So that's also in the South Asia, China also has some dilemma. That India is the number one country in the South Asia, but South Asia is not only belong to India. There's a lot of the neighboring countries, small or medium size. For China, China's foreign policy towards the South Asia means China doesn't want to confront with the Indian, but meanwhile, China want to enhance their position, presence, militarily, politically, even economically, especially economically, to the South Asia and other areas. So how China can maintain this balance? There's a question for China. China was being asked for a very long time. That is it possible for China to enhance their linkage with India and then solve all the South Asian regional issue? Obviously, it doesn't. If China want to please India or try to stabilize the relationship with India, only lead to India enhance their dominance in the South Asia areas. It's not on China's interest. But if China confront India, the problem is that we have to consume a lot of our resources to balance India, and then firstly, we'll push India and American get closer, and secondly, American will easily find more tactics, method to contain China. So that's the major Chinese foreign policy dilemma towards India. My theory is that the question for China is how China deal with a competitor or challenger in the secondary level areas. One, China has to focusing on his relationship with the major challenger or major strategic competitor. So this the question force China to think and even make China is a little bit reluctant when they need to deal with India. So I think this probably is the reason why since the last year till now, China didn't show very strong a strong attitude against the Indians' more and more aggressive policy towards the South Asia countries, including to China. But I think from now on, this year, China has to reshift its policy towards India because it's already been proved such kind of a policy try to balance India and the neighboring country in the South Asia, try to make the balance between the geopolitics and the geoeconomics based on the good willing, but not based on the very realistic strategic assessment to the regional situation, currently regional situation. China need to be very clarify at least one point that what's the real strategic meaning of India to China, whether China is possible to seeking for the coordination, not the cooperation, only the coordination with India, or China had to admit that India is the regional challenger, just like the American is Chinese global challenger. So how China can make such kind of this policy shift? This is the key issue. But in my understanding is that based on my information and knowledge about the Chinese Indian study communities, now it's quite getting very clear that China do not see India as our potential partner in any aspect. Now we see more, and we can foresee India will getting more and more aggressive towards China, towards any neighboring country. So it turns into our common problem. I think China had to get back from his former policy that try to reach a kind of the coordination with India. It's the very old school, but even based on in the context of the BRI, China will sooner or later China will realize that India is not a partner of the BRI, and India never be. So it's the waste of time to try to get India to involve such kind of the regional frameworks. Very simple conclusion is that since the last year, Indian public argue that since the CPEC crossing Kashmir areas, so in the Indians' perspective, this against it's kind of against the Indians' principle on the Kashmir sovereignty issue and so on. So this Indian will refuse to participate any project related to the BRI because China and Pakistan announced that the CPEC is the vanguard and flagship project of the BRI. So last year, in Chinese Academy, the community and the policy study circles, there's still a kind of a debate that whether China should find an alternative plan to maintain our cooperation in the framework of the CPEC, meanwhile try to get some support from India. But such kind of debate officially done. This year, nobody talk about this because we already know it's not possible. So the question for China is that China has to make the choice, not always counting on remaining the balance. Balance something is good. It's only for two countries you can both remain acceptable level coordination. But now with the self-confidence getting stronger and stronger, I mean the Indian self-confidence gets stronger and stronger, I think we already we had to admit that India doesn't want to maintain the balance between China and the United States. India will pick up the side with America. So in that way, it's totally waste of time for China. Still want to getting some good response from India. So it will be a tough year for China and the India relationship in the coming years. And I don't know how far we can go. It depends on China. It depends on the Indians' policy. Especially, it depends on the Indians' behaviors on the disputed border areas. If India try to repeat such kind of the doctrine accident in the coming years, I think we all can foresee the China and the Indian relationship will go down very, 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 very fast and very deep. So that's what I'm saying, that China didn't show his strong attitude towards the India for the past years, but it will be changed within this year and in the coming years. Thank you.
But I don't think there can be anybody more knowledgeable and suited to respond to the question that Mr. Hailin has posed about the foreign policy dilemma that China faces regarding geopolitics versus geoeconomics, and how Pakistan perceives that, and what does it mean for Pakistan's foreign policy. Then Ambassador Bashir. Ambassador Bashir has been Pakistan's foreign secretary and also served as Pakistan's High Commissioner to India. So I think he has 10 minutes to help us not only learn how to deal with India, but also how to ensure China stays on our side against India. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, let me thank the IPS for inviting me to this important seminar. And I feel indeed very privileged to be in such illustrious company. I must compliment you, Mr. Hailin, for your very thought-provoking remarks just now. And you spoke of the dilemmas that China faces in terms of geopolitics of the world and the geopolitics of the region. I think these dilemmas are universal in our time and age. In Urdu, as we say, jab zamana karvat badalta hai. So I think this is that phase where things have, it's not only just things, everything has changed and is changing. And everybody is very uncertain and lost, say, in the high seas, no direction. Now, why is this so? I mean, I'll give you some common sense elements, just, to reflect. Why has the pace of history quickened so much? It's plenty of elements at work. The first, I believe, is technology. The exponential advancement in technology are impacting lives of individuals, societies, communities. One. The second is demography. We have areas where there are population levels are sort of declining. I mean, you look at Europe, you look at Japan. Demography ordains the future, so demography is very important. Third is generational shift. Generational shift means that those who fashioned the previous century and the international order are now out of business. They've either gone up or they are no longer in positions. And the new generations, most of you around here are young people. I believe you have grown up and you're growing up and you are experiencing, you have your own worldview. It's not like the view of the previous generation. So the next element, and to my mind this is very important, we see anarchy and chaos enveloping nearly every society. It is not only India, it's not only Pakistan, it's not only, the South Asian region, but also if you look at the Western countries and Western societies, their political systems have become redundant, dysfunctional. They are producing outcomes like Narendra Modi or Mr. Trump. You look at the rise of the ultra-right in Western Europe, and you look at the attitudes which are prevalent and much applauded in Trump's home base. So what we see in India in terms of the rise of the ultra-nationalist, which would in any case take the form of Hindutva, is not to my mind an aberration. And therefore, as Mr. Hailin said, the world is no longer the same. So some of us who continue to believe in the system of the United Nations, in values and norms that were fashioned in the previous century, are living in a mistaken belief. Because those who proposed and propagated pluralism, democracy, human rights, and all the international system and norms and rules of behavior sanctified by the United Nations, which we in Pakistan took as universal values, are being discarded as they do not correspond to the home realities of those who framed those. So these are general thoughts as an introduction. Now, I think Mr. Hailin has given a very, very clueful perspective of Chinese dilemmas and thinking. But let me hazard a guess. I think the only country in the world which is not being affected in a negative way by technological advancement and the elements that I mentioned, like the institutions' inability to cope with change. Governments are becoming irrelevant. There is a redundancy syndrome at work because the change in society, the social media and whatever. So the government institutions everywhere are lagging behind, and the governance space is being left open and is being filled, one, by the corporate sector, the private sector, and other elements. In certain cases, the mafia or the drug people and all the troublemakers. So this anarchy, which corresponds to lack of governance, can perhaps be explained in these terms. But China is an exception. China today, and has for its past almost 70 years, a system of governance which corresponds to China's home realities. And it has the backing of thousands of years of Chinese civilization. The Chinese bureaucracy, the Chinese institutions, they took pride in what was developed over centuries in China in terms of governance. So political system intact, very wise leadership going forward. Two, economically, it's capitalism plus socialism. So they can make the course corrections. If they want to do something, they are able to deliver because their institutions and their government and their systems work. The third element of the Chinese approach to today's world or to world history is that they have a unique reading of global history. It is not predicated in the constructs of the West. People in this part of the world, like South Asia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, we all think that we are great alim fazals, we are great scholars, We are great at imitating. You look at the nuclear strategic dimension between India and Pakistan. I and Dr. Rifaat, we have been part of these Western-sponsored track 2 on nuclear subjects, and we get lectures from our wise people about the history of the Cold War and how the Soviet Union and the US managed their nuclear relationship. in thought, in construct, in concepts, more so in India, less in Pakistan. We are just imitating the West. Right? It does not apply, it does not work. I mean, with technology, which is also in the weapons field, the undersea drones, the artificial intelligence, the cyber warfare, and the other stuff, the outer space, weaponization, all this has changed. Now, where are the Indians making their biggest mistake? They have opted. Narendra Modi came, he invited the neighbors, and Basit was there, the South Asian neighbors, to his inauguration. It did not take very long for him to forget about the immediate neighborhood. And then he jumped to the big league, and he felt redeemed by the visits of the American leadership. He was banned from visiting even the US, from getting a US visa. So, so that was the fascination in a personal sense. Two, they thought that getting the permanent seat on the Security Council, getting into the NSG, will give them that global status. It has not happened, it will never happen. You do not become a great power by either blind militarization or being a bully or being a hegemon. Greatness is intrinsic worth of a civilization. So what does India, or for that matter South Asia, has to offer to the world today? Fast food, Pizza Huts, brand names? Is this the civilizational worth of this region today? Why is it that South Asia is the most underdeveloped in the greater Asian region? I think India bears a huge and great responsibility for keeping South Asia from going ahead. It is because of these attitudes, and I believe you have discussed the reasons for all this in this morning's session of where it's coming from. But insofar as Pakistan and China are concerned, to Mr. Hailin, I will say that my reading, and I've written on this, that in this changing world, geopolitics cannot upend geoeconomics. You can, as the Indians are doing, inviting extra-regional, extra-continental powers to interact for their own purposes and open a new Cold War, more specifically in Asia or generally in Eurasia. This will not happen. These concepts of quads and alliance of maritime democracies, in my humble estimation, these will not fly. The whole game, from the perspective of the United States and the Western powers, it's about not so much continental Eurasia as it is about the Indian Ocean. The contest is between the maritime powers and the mainland powers. Some years ago, a decade or so, there was this thing about multipolarity taking shape, which then took the form of BRICS. And since then, we've seen what has happened to BRICS. So now, essentially, that configuration is out of date. What remains is China, Russia. They have a trilateral with India. But as our friend from China has said very clearly, by inviting or agreeing to play a proxy for a great power, you do not achieve greatness. India does not have the capacity to make a meaningful difference to the security or the freedom of navigation in the Indian Ocean. It's all about capacity. I think some of us in this country who have not been to Delhi or not been to India are fascinated by the glimpses that they project. The fact is that Indian social economic indices are absolutely horrible. So, as our Chinese friend said, it's potentially a huge market. That is how the world looks at it. I think, in my estimation, China will continue because it has a unique reading of global history, the rising, declining paths and all that, and they are very careful. They will continue to exercise strategic patience. The question for China, as for Pakistan, will be how to, quote unquote, manage relations. Unfortunately, we find ourselves today in a situation which is a bit alarming. Since December, the LOC has been on fire. The Indian TV studios have become war rooms. There's mass hysteria against Pakistan, which is being propagated, and I'm happy it's not here. It's not finding any news, or it's not on the talk shows. But if you follow the Indian press or you see the Indian television, you will see the madness that has been unleashed. In my estimation, India is going to, in the coming months, maybe less than a year, they will reposition. And the Americans will come to realize the true face of India in a couple of months. There will be gestures made to China, or they will respond to the Chinese invitation. I expect the Indian Prime Minister to visit China to make some optics. They are making some course correction right now with Russia. But this Prime Minister of India is surrounded by hawks and by the RSS. And that is rather unfortunate because, even if you take a benign view and a sympathetic view of India, I have great sympathy for the people of India because they are in the process of destroying themselves. They are in a total self-destruct mode. We talked briefly about the minorities and the communal tensions and what is happening. This whole magic of Modi faded quite a lot of time ago. And I think what we are witnessing today, they will soon get into this election mode. They're already in the election mode. It's a perpetual election mode. I was 2 years in Delhi. Not one day could Lok Sabha transact business. And I don't think it has changed because Basit is a more recent, arrival from Delhi. So we will have to exercise patience. We will have to ensure that these elements of change which are taking place also in our society and our ability to govern ourselves effectively are resolved in a manner which is good for the people of this country. Indian policy is to isolate Pakistan, declared policy, state policy. I think today we are in a much better position to isolate India. They can act east or look east or act east policy, but what will they find in the Pacific? The real stuff is Eurasian mainland. If they opt to block or oppose the BRI, I think they are committing suicide. So thank you very much for bearing with me these thoughts.
An illuminating assessment of the transforming world, and I think we all agree that we are living in a constantly changing world where both reality and perception are changing. But like you also pointed out, that the essential contest for this transformational era is between maritime powers and continental powers. So how that contest is likely to play out, I don't think I have anyone more knowledgeable than my favorite teacher, Dr. Rifaat, to offer us an assessment and also a policy prescription of how to deal with the changing reality. Should we look for new solutions, or should we continue to rely on old strategic options? Thank you.
So my challenge is to keep you awake, and in the process also try to keep myself awake. But the second, more serious, is that to say something meaningful about the subject at hand. And I would like to take a cue from Roy Preberg's 73 article, which was provocatively titled, "Could we study international relations and foreign policy as if people matter?" It is the lack of the centrality of people's concern to foreign policy in general and security policies in particular, which explains the rise of the popularity or acceptance of India's narrative about its own self and about its hostile propaganda against Pakistan. That's why India has been very successful in being able to paint Pakistan with a terrorist brush, even though Pakistan had paid the tremendous price of having sacrificed 80,000 people, 80,000 civilian casualties, including very large number of casualties of security forces. So the question arises that why international community is not accepting Pakistan's moral and ethical stand on the Kashmir issue. That's one. And I would like to offer at least 4 factors as explanations for why the international community's response, favorable response towards India, and as a consequence, hostile response towards Pakistan, has wavered between indifference and non-attention. So, Kashmiri's sufferings, which have been documented extensively in recent writings, particularly the 2015 report, which talks about the structure of violence in India. And why is it that those reports do not get the kind of attraction or kind of traction and kind of attention that they deserve? One is India's successful projection of itself as a rising power. Projection. I'm not talking about the reality. India has been able to project itself as the rising power. And the Indian propaganda about its rising power has been so successful that there are several recent reports, including one by World Bank, which looks at India's rise to a number 1 status of global economy by 2030. We all know that India has a long way. I wouldn't say India is light years away, but India has a long way to be reaching that point. The second factor is, and I'm sorry to say this, are inherent contradictions in Pakistan's Kashmir policy of its own. After the signing of the Simla Agreement, Pakistan went along with the Indian narrative that issue was to be discussed in a bilateral framework, even though in the Shimla Agreement, there is a provision that the relationship between India and Pakistan will be governed by the UN Charter. So by implication, anything that was part of the agenda of the UN Charter had to be an international concern. But more importantly, there was a specific clause that was inserted into the Shimla Agreement which referred it to as a dispute between the two countries. But for some reason, under both Zulfikar Bhutto and the subsequent regimes, we failed to highlight India's repeated suppression and subversion of the democratic process as it related to the Indian occupied Kashmir. And then came the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan, and the world became more concerned about how to vacate that aggression. And then the issue of Kashmir slided further down the road. And then the Soviet Afghan adventure failed, the war ended, and then within the 10 years, or roughly about 11 years of that, we had the new phenomena of the rise of extremism. And during all these years, India was successfully able to shift the world attention on its own drift into extremism. And we do not have time and the space to discuss this further, but this was highlighted during the earlier discussion in the morning panel. Now you have a strange phenomena whereby there are many platforms, multiple platforms available to Pakistan for raising the legitimate, ethical and moral issue of Kashmir as a issue which is not about territory. It is about the self-determination and the Indian denial of self-determination to the Kashmiri people. You have AD, you have OIC, you have UN, you have EU, and etc., etc. But why is it that whenever Pakistan raises the Kashmir issue on these platforms, the world pays very little attention to what Pakistan is saying? And that, I think, has something to do with Pakistan's own failure of not being able to raise its voice when the time was ripe and the world was more concerned about it. Just in that context, this refers to the presentation made by our Chinese friend. I was intrigued by the 1974 Shanghai Declaration which was signed between Beijing and Washington. And of all the places, you would find under, I think, perhaps Article 36 of that declaration, or 25, I do not recall, I do not have but the mention is there. There's a reference to the Chinese, by the Chinese side, to the Kashmir issue. In 74, in Shanghai Declaration. And there's a whole passage in which the Chinese government is feeling agitated over the fact that the Indians have suppressed the right of the Kashmiri people. But since then, that reference is never invoked. And the mention of Kashmir issue in a multilateral context as a issue which is a dispute between India and Pakistan is never mentioned. But the only mention that the Chinese make today, and that shows how pragmatic the Chinese attitude towards Kashmir has become, is that the solution has to be sought bilaterally. And there is never in the Chinese latest pronouncement any reference to the UN resolution. So this dilution of China's interest in the Kashmir issue may have something to do with Pakistan's inconsistent policy domestically towards the Kashmir issue. And finally, you have multiple transitions taking place in South Asia right now. One is the domestic transition, and the other is the regional transition, and the third is the global transition. Ambassador Salman Bashir Sahab has very succinctly summarized it as the age of uncertainty. But in this age of uncertainty, the only thing certain are your geopolitical interests. And we have been foolishly arguing in Pakistan that if we improve our economic and trade and investment ties with India, so we will tend to benefit from it. This is not the argument which is being played out by the Indian hawks. They think that they are locked on a course of action to isolate Pakistan, and they think, in their judgment, that they have successfully done that. So the size of Indian economy, the growing size of Indian diaspora, Indian activism, and the successful use of newly acquired resources. If you look at the Indian defense budget, its annual increases are equal right now to the size of Pakistan's total military expenditure. So Indians have more money to spend and invest in propaganda tools which they have perfected to the form of an art. But Pakistan is a struggling economy. Pakistan's future doesn't have to be. It can be very bright. It can be provided we pay attention to the domestic political scene. If we have a stable polity, if we can get our country together, so Pakistan can be a force. And that is something that rankles the Indian mind. That what happens if Pakistan becomes a stable country, Pakistan develops as a mature or as a moderate country, what is going to happen to the future of South Asia? Indian foreign policy elites knows that kind of a stable, future, progressive Pakistan will be very, very hard to isolate. So they have taken the other task. The other task is to play upon Pakistan's internal fault lines, whether those are ethnic, whether those are ideological, whether those are political, and to destabilize Pakistan. So in that context, I think we have a few uncertainties about India's strategic and economic behavior. But by and large, I would say that it's not that Pakistan has a moral or a weak case on Kashmir. I think Pakistan has a very, very strong moral and ethical case on the Kashmir issue. But unfortunately, we have not played our cards well. Thank you.
Dr. Rifaat, thank you so much. You never fail to inspire me whenever I listen to your very deep, incisive, and thought-provoking ideas. Now that leaves me to request Ambassador Basit, who brings with him the most recent experience of dealing with India under perhaps the most difficult of circumstances, how Pakistan's foreign policy was conducted and how it should be conducted. I think he is in a capacity to speak about that as well. Considering what China believes are its own primary concerns, in which it seems that geoeconomics takes precedence over geopolitics. What does that mean for Pakistan? should we continue to deal with India as we have always dealt, or what should be the way forward? I'll leave that to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali, and what a pleasure to be talking again at this forum. Let me very briefly first touch upon the issue at hand as to why the international community has by and large been indifferent to the rising extremism in India. And I can count 4 reasons for that. Firstly, I think Hindutva is smarter than the populist movements or right-wing elements in the West. Because Hindutva, in collaboration with Prime Minister Modi or candidate Modi, has very smartly co-opted corporate India. You name all the Mittals, Ambanis, Adanis and Jindals, you find all these big names more or less promoting the Modi's electoral agenda as well as its policies from developing infrastructure in the country to energy, you name anything. So they have done that very smartly. And not only that, the Indian media, if you go through that, and Ambassador Salman Bashir also mentioned, that more or less seems okay with the new trends in which India finds itself. So these two, this co-option with corporate India and the Indian media, I think is one of the most important elements or reasons which has not allowed the regressive narrative of Hindutva to get much attraction abroad. Secondly, we must not ignore the fact that Indian diaspora around the world plays a very, very important role. And unlike Pakistani diaspora, Indian diaspora is not divided along the political lines. You go to UK, US or any other Western country, you will always find Muslim League Noon chapter or People's Party chapter or PDR chapter. But by and large, Indian media, when it comes to Indian diaspora, when it comes to India, they do not take political positions outside India. So that goes to their huge advantage. And thirdly, the Indian diaspora, you would find them everywhere. You name any think tank in the West, US, be it US, UK, even government departments where you find Indians at very influential positions. So hence, attention towards Hindutva is not there. And whether Ikhlaq is lynched in India or Pehlu Khan is lynched in India or any Dalit is lynched in India, they do not take notice of those atrocities taking place. Dr. Rifaat Hussain mentioned Kashmir, and especially after Burhan Wani's martyrdom, what happened there we all know. But the West just looked the other way. We could find some stories here and there, but otherwise, more or less, the international community as a whole did not take much notice of the atrocities. Not only the Western countries, it was shocking to see as to how the Muslim world reacted to that. Barring one proposal to send an international or OIC delegation to OIOK, we did not see much hue and cry, even in the Muslim countries. And so this is, the reality of India and Hindutva itself. Then how can you expect countries like UK, where India is the second biggest investor in that country, So India's investment, they're tackling all these issues very, very cleverly, and trying to give incentives to countries like US under Trump particularly, and the UK, and all the Western countries. So Hindutva or rising Hindutva does not get much attention because of geoeconomics. Let's put it this way, as Ambassador Salman Bashir mentioned. Now it's a Herculean task for us as to how to counter that, and whether or not we have the capacity to do that, because we are so much embroiled or bogged down in our own internal problems that we hardly get, we do not find ourselves in a position to counter India in the international arena. And I would be very honest with you, because I would very respectfully differ with Ambassador Salman Bashir that India is kind of, is on a self-destruct mode. That may be correct, because the inherent contradictions one can very easily discern when you visit India or stay in India, especially the inter-caste tensions and the status quo forces, the 15% Brahmanical or upper caste elements which would not allow the lower caste to mobilize upwards socially or economically. So those tensions are there. But I think the control of the upper caste is so deep in India that I do not see that happening anytime soon. And India, let's admit, it has been able over the last 20-25 years, despite heaviest of odds, its internal contradictions, it has been able to put itself on a trajectory of development and progress. It has been able to lift millions of people out of the proverbial poverty line. It has been able to expand its manufacturing base. It is focusing on education. Having said that, still people, as I said in the morning, 300 million people is still living below the poverty line. There are problems related to electricity. 300 million people haven't seen electricity. So there are problems. But I think the caste system in many ways also works to reinforce the political system in India. And it's a very paradoxical situation. But India is a land of paradoxes, no doubt about that. The question for us, I think for Pakistan, is that if Prime Minister Modi wins in 2019, previously it was a shoe-in. Everybody thought that Mr. Modi is a two-time Prime Minister at least, if not 3 times, because the opposition continues to be in disarray. Rahul Gandhi, who has now become the President of Indian National Congress, is still not seen as a potential challenger to Prime Minister Modi. So if the BJP wins 2019 elections, I think we will see some repositioning of India vis-a-vis towards Pakistan, because we have seen during the last 4 years and then 5 years next year that India's coercive diplomacy vis-a-vis Pakistan has not really worked. Whether it was bilaterally or through the cancellation of the 19th SAARC summit in Pakistan, we stood our ground, and that augurs well for Pakistan at the end of the day. I, like Salman Bashir, would counsel that we need patient diplomacy at the moment. While we do want normalization of relations with India, but that cannot be at the cost of our dignity and honor. We would like to have, a relationship which is based on mutual respect and mutual interest. So we need to, because even if today the dialogue process starts, you cannot expect India to give you much, because they are trying to handle the Jammu and Kashmir issue entirely differently now. They are not seeking dialogue with Pakistan on on Jammu and Kashmir. Hence, their focus is on the UFA joint statement, which was issued on 10 July 2015. And that, I think, was a huge faux pas on our part, because for the first time in a joint India-Pakistan document, we could not explicitly mention Kashmir, the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. So that was a huge mistake. But unfortunately, on the other hand, we are pursuing or allowing India to pursue with us the terror stream with them, forgetting the other stream to discuss important political issues, including Jammu and Kashmir. Our two NSAs have been meeting here and there, from Bangkok to Paris and Paris to again Bangkok. But those talks are focused only on issues related to terrorism, and that, to my mind, that is a huge mistake. We are kind of, being inveigled into this situation by India, which is not the right thing for us to do. We need to have a dialogue with India, but that should be on the basis of what the two countries agreed in Islamabad on 9th of December 2015 on the margins of the Heart of Asia conference in Islamabad. That is the only way forward. If India agrees to have dialogue with us on the basis of that, welcome. If not, we can always wait for them to make up their mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think this session must not have disappointed you in terms of not provoking you into a thought-provoking mode, and also looking forward to a very engaging discussion, for which we don't have much time. But I'll request Dr. Waqar to conduct the question and answer session.
You can do that thing. Please
Okay.
go ahead. I'll just sum up.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
We have about
10 minutes.
About 10 minutes or so for the question and answer session. I'll request the audience to kindly identify themselves. And do we have another mic? Excuse me? Okay, thank you. I'll appreciate if you identify yourself and ask brief and to the point questions, so that we can accommodate as many as possible. Okay, the lady in front. Please also identify who do you want to address this question to.
My question is, this is Anam Khan. My question is about the extremist mindset of individuals in Indian Army. For example, if in a crisis situation in a battlefield, a commander who is delegated to do the to control the issues of command and control of Prahar and Pragati, which are tactical nuclear weapons of India, if that soldier has a mindset of destroying Pakistan into 40 pieces, why does not Pakistan try to turn the international attention towards that issue? And also, US and West, they're not even thinking about accommodating Pakistan into the export control cartels related to the nuclear export control. But at the same time, their agreements with India, like nuclear deals and also LEOMA and all those maritime security issues. What is your take? Anybody from the panel, I think, is can answer the question. What is your viewpoint of what Pakistan should do about that, and also what international community should do about that?
Will the panel agree if we take a couple of questions and then we can address them together? Okay, that gentleman in the back.
Thank you. This is Hida Hussain, Radio News Network. Sir, my question is to Mr. Abdul Basit Saab. Sir, you just mentioned that 3 million people in India are living believe in the power.
Talking about Hindutva, and we all agreed in the previous session that this contemporary version of Hindutva is actually legalized one and more institutionalized one. It's more legal now. So there is this concept in Hindutva called Akhand Bharat, or the expanded India. What do you think the role of India in Afghanistan and in Asia Pacific? Do you think this increased role of India is somehow materialized, or if not materialized, is actually, assisting this concept of Akhand Bharat? That is all. And what does Pakistan has to offer to cater this geopolitical significance of India, or geopolitical implication which Pakistan is facing with due to this Hindutva expansion of India?
Thank you, Ms. Amri. Who do you want to address this question to?
Is a very important question, and that question has to do with the insider threat, which means that there are people within the security organization who, because of their ideological convictions, may not obey the rules of the organization. In that context, you have pointed out. But unfortunately, one consequence of this Islamophobia and the attention or the issue of terrorism in Pakistan, there has been more of a focus on Pakistan and less of a focus on India. So this, I think, is something that needs to be corrected. And largely about the tactical nukes, and I think the Indians are now, as we speak, are also developing tactical nukes, but nobody wants to talk about it. They have aggressively declared that, and they have challenged Pakistan's ability to respond to the Indian conventional aggression with nuclear weapons or tactical nuclear weapons. And those, unfortunately, kind of dangerous and very alarming statements by the top Indian leadership has not been paid enough attention to. So there is a need for us to highlight that. And as regards the discriminatory practices towards Pakistan when it comes to Pakistan's quest to join NSG or seek membership of the International Proliferation Organization, I would only say that Pakistan is the victim of the double standards that my Chinese friend had talked about on this issue. Thank you.
Salman bhai,
There was a question about Akhand Bharat. This may have been discussed in the morning, but to my understanding, if you look at Indian mythology and its influence and impact on the Indian mind, even pre-independence days, there is this myth about Greater India, which is historically not quite true, but somehow this mythology finds a very special place in the Indian philosophy. I can refer to two books, Defending India by Jaswant Singh, which carries a number of quotes, Stephen Cohen, and more recently Shyam Saran. And if you read just the first chapter of Shyam's book, it gives you the clear view of how India views the world. And it starts by saying that our present political frontiers do not correspond with our strategic or cultural frontiers. So, in that sense, this is a deeply ingrained thought among their thinkers, their leaders, their strategists. To my understanding, Pakistan is not a foreign policy issue in India. It is a domestic policy issue. And I'm talking here of the official India and the northern Indian belt. It may not be so if you were to visit Calcutta, for instance, or some of the southern states. So this is something, the word partition evokes such pain and such suffering and anguish among the Indians. They lament. While we celebrate independence, they do not really celebrate. They talk only of partition. So that is, I think, a mental, psychological dilemma that they face.
One question was...
Yeah, about poverty. I think we can learn a lot from Indians as well, because has to have to improve our economic situation. And again, I would say our priorities are lopsided. Our mainstay is agriculture, and somehow we have not been able to develop that sector of our economy. Hence, we have not been able to produce the desired results. So my advice to our decision makers would be that focus on agriculture and agriculture related industries. That would be the best way forward for you. Secondly, I just wanted to mention one thing, very interesting fact about Hindutva, 1 minute only. Hindutva is again, a very interesting concept in the sense that they strongly, why it is becoming more and more extremist in its outlook. People who believe in Hindutva, they strongly feel that all those who are living in India not only respect India as their fatherland or motherland, but also consider the soil of India as holy, Punya Putri, and as compared to Pitri Bhu, it should also be their Punya Bhu. So that makes it very interesting. Hence, they become very inflexible towards Muslims or Christians living in India, because for us, India, for that matter, Pakistan can never be a holy land. So there are contradictions, So that hence, that the entire Hindutva philosophy, how it works against religions of book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more round. Any more questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Ji.
Assalamualaikum. I am Samir from Khalid University. My question is from Sir Abdul Basit. You told that Indian diaspora is so united worldwide. So when you see the recent developments and when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was coming to India and there was a huge campaign for Khalistan movement. Mm-hmm. So don't you see that there is a division in Indian diaspora? How do you think?
And that is minority. That is correct to a certain extent, but that is a peculiar problem because most Sikhs, Punjabis left after 1984 and migrated to these countries like Canada particularly and carried out their Khalistan movement from there. So that is a peculiar case. But by and large, I am not saying that no fissures, but by and large, as compared to Pakistani diaspora, you find Indian diaspora apolitical when they are abroad. They do take interest, they take part in local politics, but they don't do Indian politics abroad. So that is the difference.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then okay, last question. Yes, madam.
Sir, in the wake of recent
you can take the mic, please.
In the wake of recent events, recent visit by Netanyahu to India, can we say that Hindutva is actually inspired by Zionism, or is it supported by Zionism actually?
Who do you want to address this question?
Anyone?
It's complex.
Okay. I'll request
Dr. Saab is.
I'll request Ambassador Bashir to address that.
Sir, aap.
After you. Well, I am not qualified really to address that. I don't know what precedes, but to my mind, probably Hindutva precedes Zionism.
Yes.
Basically, well, one is the political context, the context of the land, the Holy Land. So that is true, but its contemporary expression, to my mind, is ultra-nationalism based on a mythology. Zionism, on the other hand, again uses religion. Is a phenomena of more recent times compared to Hindutva. But there are definite similarities. But the interesting part is that the visit of Modi to Israel and then the visit of Netanyahu to Delhi, these are significant developments. Israel happens to be a major supplier of technology and defense equipment, so therefore you have to take note of it.
Mr. Basit, you want to add something?
No, I'm fine.
No?
Just say a few remarks, closing remarks. Awaz aa rahi? Well, I think, first of all, I have had a wonderful day. The sessions that I have attended, I have immensely benefited, and the quality of participants, and especially those who have contributed to the discussion, is just truly outstanding. And some of the best practitioners and people from academia have joined, and glad that a brother from China is also in our midst. And so even this session, as many people have said, that doing a session in the afternoon after a very good lunch is a very bad proposition, but the quality of discourse, I'm sure I never felt a moment of boring or disinterest. Every moment and every discourse was illuminating. Well, there are many ebbs and flows in terms of the emotions that I've been through in these presentations. I was intrigued by the presentation of our Chinese brother and the three dilemmas that he has mentioned, and those are very powerful messages. I'm not going to paraphrase any one of those, but I think that we must keep in the background as to how the situation will evolve in the subcontinent. So that has a very important role to play. The discourse of Brother Salman, my very great friend Salman Sahab, it's again heartening. Just one message that really touched me was that I feel pity for Indians because they are taken for a ride or to a destructive path. And frankly, this is one thing that we must not forget, that Hindutva is a craftsmanship. It is not a matter of history. It is an ideology crafted with a political agenda, and it has been immensely successful. So while there may be call for greater work to avoid the adverse consequences that obviously will be felt in the region, and we, as Salman said, that we are a domestic agenda of that Hindutva. So, we will face it off, but we have to remind ourselves this is a craftsmanship. It is not a matter of history. It is not a revealed religion. It is not something that was even known 200 years ago, or there wasn't any sign of it 300 years ago. And that in this part of the world, a huge population has lived under pretty decent economic conditions and congenial environment, and not the type of tensions and the destructive forces that we are facing at the moment. Well, I think Dr. Rifaat has made an outstanding point, which is that while we are toughing it out, the Kashmir issue, we have not been able to do justice with it. And the inconsistencies and contradictions, we need to work to remove those. The discourse from my brother Basit was very sobering. And he obviously has highlighted the uphill task, almost impossible task of facing off the onslaught, especially from the Indian diaspora, which is not just giving money, but they are occupying increasingly important positions in Western societies. And also the corporate and media combined that is helping fuel this thing. And I think this is a challenge and a somber thought. We must. I think this discourse that we have, I feel that in Pakistan there is not sufficient appreciation of what is Hindutva and what it is doing to their society. And I think we should also realize that there is an Indian constitution starkly different than what Hindutva preaches. And there are people who are fighting. There is this small thing that is going on, Hadia, in the Supreme Court of India. That should give some hope to the people. And this father, who is an atheist of Hadia, he is supported by the entire Hindutva machinery to paint that this girl who has married completely out of her free will, that she is being kidnapped by a Muslim who works in Oman or in Gulf countries and is transporting her to Syria as IS member. So I feel that there are forces in India, and I'm sure Basit Saab will agree with me, who are equally concerned and worried about this whole thing. Their whole constitutional system is at risk. The exclusion, very recently we talk of Muslims. It's not just Muslims at risk. What has happened in Orissa, only just recently, one of the BJP local fellow was killed, and the whole town, which had the majority of Christians, was completely burnt down. All houses were destroyed, and those people from that village, they were sent into a camp, and in that camp also they are not. They are afraid of attacks because they just simply want to kill them. They want to cleanse them, or that there is a ghar wapsi. And I think there are so many opportunities. How would the West turn their faces away from what this new chief minister in Lucknow is doing? He does so many things which are flagrant violation of human rights, an invitation to exclusion, and making minorities live in fear. So I think there are challenges, but though we should recognize those challenges and look for opportunities to find ways. And last, I would say that I think we should realize that we are not here to be destroyed by India. And that should give us confidence as a minimal state that inshallah we will survive. And we are in no way having any designs to harm India the way it plans to harm Pakistan. So this should give us good reasons to formulate strategies which are confident and which are based on self-defense as opposed to any aggression that people are labeling us that we are terrorist states or that we have designs in the region or we are creating strategic depths, etc. There are no such thing. Finally, let me just close on this remark that there is a whole world. Obviously, we are concerned with the West, but there is a whole world. And this notion Salman Saab made of maritime nations and landmass-based nations. I mean, we have to look up China, Russia, the whole Central Asia, Turkey. We have to work with them, and obviously the Middle East. So there are, in my views, opportunities and need for looking up to them for stronger partnerships. It's been too long that we have thought that the world ends in the West, and that unless the Western alliance would not stand behind us, we will be out of business. So these are some of the thoughts, and I once again thank all the speakers, Salman Bhai, Mr. Wi-Fi, Waifan, and Rifat Bhai, Salam Saab, all of them. Great. Basit Saab. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for participating and listening to this session. I think we have about 20 minutes before we have the concluding session, and I believe we are supposed to be assembled downstairs
Yes, sir.
for the concluding session. Thank you so much.
But before that, we have tea, sir.
Okay.
Good.
Well earned tea.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. 1 minute only. Hindutva is again, a very interesting concept in the sense that they strongly, why it is becoming more and more extremist in its outlook. People who believe in Hindutva, they strongly feel that all those who are living in India not only respect India as their fatherland or motherland, but also consider the soil of India as holy, Punya Putri, and as compared to Pitri Bhu, it should also be their Punya Bhu. So that makes it very interesting. Hence, they become very inflexible towards Muslims or Christians living in India, because for us, India, for that matter, Pakistan can never be a holy land. So there are contradictions, So that hence, that the entire Hindutva philosophy, how it works against religions of book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more round. Any more questions?
थक गए
Okay.
हम भी थक गए या सो गए
जी.
Assalamualaikum. I am Samir Akram from Zamir University. My question is from Sir Abdul Basit. You told that Indian diaspora is so united worldwide. So when we see the recent developments and when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was coming to India and there was a huge campaign for Khalistan movement. So don't you see that there is a division in Indian diaspora? How do you think?
That is minority. That is correct to a certain extent, but that is a peculiar problem because most Sikhs, Punjabis left after 1984 and migrated to these countries like Canada particularly and carried out their Khalistan movement from there. So that is a peculiar case. But by and large, I am not saying that no fissures, but by and large, as compared to Pakistani diaspora, you find Indian diaspora apolitical when they are abroad. They do take interest, they take part in local politics, but they don't do Indian politics abroad. So that is the difference.
Okay, if there are no more questions, then okay, last question. Yes, madam.
Sir, in the wake of recent
You can take the mic, please.
in the wake of recent events, recent visit by Netanyahu to India, can we say that Hindutva is actually inspired by Zionism, or is it supported by Zionism actually?
Who do you want to address this question?
Anyone?
It's complex.
Okay. I'll request
Dr. Saab is.
I'll request Ambassador Bashir to address that.
Sir, aap.
After you. Well, I am not qualified really to address that. I don't know what precedes, but to my mind, probably Hindutva precedes Zionism.
Yes.
Basically, Well, one is the political context, the context of the land, the Holy Land. So that is true, but its contemporary expression, to my mind, is ultra-nationalism based on the mythology. Zionism, on the other hand, again uses religion. Is a phenomena of more recent times compared to Hindutva. But there are definite similarities. But the interesting part is that the visit of Modi to Israel and then the visit of Netanyahu to Delhi, these are significant developments. Israel happens to be a major supplier of technology and defense equipment, so therefore you have to take note of it.
Mr. Basit, you want to add something?
No, I'm fine.
Just say a few remarks, closing remarks. Awaaz aa rahi?
Yes.
Well, I think, first of all, I have had a wonderful day. The sessions that I have attended, I have immensely benefited, and the quality of participants, and especially those who have contributed to the discussion, is just truly outstanding. And some of the best practitioners and people from academia have joined, and glad that a brother from China is also in our midst. And so even this session, as many people have said, that doing a session in the afternoon after a very good lunch is a very bad proposition, but the quality of discourse, I'm sure I never felt a moment of boring or disinterest. Every moment and every discourse was illuminating. Well, there are many ebbs and flows in terms of the emotions that I have been through in these presentations. I was intrigued by the presentation of our Chinese brother and the three dilemmas that he has mentioned, and those are very powerful messages. I'm not going to paraphrase any one of those, but I think that we must keep in the background as to how the situation will evolve in the subcontinent. So that has a very important role to play. The discourse of Brother Salman, my very great friend Salman Sahab, it's again heartening. Just one message that really touched me was that I feel pity for Indians because they are taken for a ride or to a destructive path. And frankly, this is one thing that we must not forget, that Hindutva is a craftsmanship. It is not a matter of history. It is an ideology crafted with a political agenda, and it has been immensely successful. So while there may be call for greater work to avoid the adverse consequences that obviously will be felt in the region, and we, as Salman said, that we are a domestic agenda of that Hindutva. So, we will face it off, but we have to remind ourselves this is a craftsmanship. It is not a matter of history. It is not a revealed religion. It is not something that was even known 200 years ago, or there wasn't any sign of it 300 years ago. And that in this part of the world, a huge population has lived under pretty decent economic conditions and congenial environment, and not the type of tensions and the destructive forces that we are facing at the moment. Well, I think Dr. Rifaat has made an outstanding point, which is that while we are toughing it out, the Kashmir issue, we have not been able to do justice with it. And the inconsistencies and contradictions, we need to work to remove those. The discourse from my brother Basit was very sobering. And he obviously has highlighted the uphill task, almost impossible task of facing off the onslaught, especially from the Indian diaspora, which is not just giving money, but they are occupying increasingly important positions in Western societies. And also the corporate and media combined that is helping fuel this thing. And I think this is a challenge and a somber thought. We must. I think this discourse that we have, I feel that in Pakistan there is not sufficient appreciation of what is Hindutva and what it is doing to their society. And I think we should also realize that there is an Indian constitution starkly different than what Hindutva preaches. And there are people who are fighting. There is this small thing that is going on, Hadia, in the Supreme Court of India. That should give some hope to the people. And this father, who is an atheist of Hadia, he is supported by the entire Hindutva machinery to paint that this girl who has married completely out of her free will, that she is being kidnapped by a Muslim who works in Oman or in Gulf countries and is transporting her to Syria as IS member. So I feel that there are forces in India, and I'm sure Basit Saab will agree with me, who are equally concerned and worried about this whole thing. Their whole constitutional system is at risk. The exclusion, very recently we talk of Muslims. It's not just Muslims at risk. What has happened in Orissa, only just recently, one of the BJP local fellow was killed, and the whole town, which had the majority of Christians, was completely burnt down. All houses were destroyed, and those people from that village, they were sent into a camp, and in that camp also they are not. They are afraid of attacks because they just simply want to kill them. They want to cleanse them, or that there is a ghar wapsi. And I think there are so many opportunities. How would the West turn their faces away from what this new chief minister in Lucknow is doing? He does so many things which are flagrant violation of human rights, an invitation to exclusion, and making minorities live in fear. So I think there are challenges, but we should recognize those challenges and look for opportunities to find ways. And last, I would say that I think we should realize that we are not here to be destroyed by India. And that should give us confidence as a minimal state that inshallah we will survive. And we are in no way having any designs to harm India the way it plans to harm Pakistan. So this should give us good reasons to formulate strategies which are confident, and which are based on self-defense as opposed to any aggression that people are labeling us that we are terrorist states or that we have designs in the region or we are creating strategic depths, etc. There are no such thing. Finally, let me just close on this remark that there is a whole world. Obviously, we are concerned with the West, but there is a whole world. And this notion Salman Saab made of maritime nations and landmass-based nations. I mean, we have to look up China, Russia, the whole Central Asia, Turkey. We have to work with them, and obviously the Middle East. So there are, in my views, opportunities and need for looking up to them for stronger partnerships. It's been too long that we have thought that the world ends in the West, and that unless the Western alliance would not stand behind us, we will be out of business. So these are some of the thoughts, and I once again thank all the speakers, Salman Bhai, Mr. Wi-Fi, Waifan, and Rifaat Bhai, Abdul Saab, all of them. Great. Basit Saab. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for participating and listening to this session. I think we have about 20 minutes before we have the concluding session, and I believe we are supposed to be assembled downstairs for the concluding session. Thank you so much.
But before that, we have tea, sir.
Okay.
Good.
Well earned tea.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.